The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Israel is our great friend and ally. For over 50 years, the United States and Israeli leaders have been close friends. Our common values of democracy and liberty unite us, among other things. This administration sometimes forgets this. Be it the Iranian nuclear program or pressuring Israel over peace talks with the Palestinians, our recent policies have damaged our relationship. I was in Israel not too long ago, and I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu when Secretary Kerry came down with the deal, the bad deal, as Prime Minister Netanyahu referred to it. We let Iran walk all over us. At the end of the day, we weakened sanctions in exchange for allowing Iran to continue to develop nuclear weapons. In my opinion, the United States gave away the farm and the mineral rights in this bad deal. The threats against our good friend Israel are growing. The point of this hearing is to examine 3 issues. First, the issue of European countries boycotting Israeli businesses that are in the settlement areas. Make no mistake, this is a political move, not an economic move. Some European countries don't like Israeli settlements, so they're trying to shut them down by not buying any goods from Israel. The European Union is Israel's #1 trading partner to the tune of about 1/3 in total trade. If EU countries turn the heat on boycotts, it could have dire consequences for the Israeli economy. In January, a $200 billion Dutch pension firm divested from 5 top Israeli banks. In January, Germany announced that it would not renew research grants to Israeli companies that do business over the Green Line. I fear this is an intentional move to pressure the Israelis to give ground, literally give ground, in peace talks with the Palestinians. But boycotting goods is the wrong way to get peace. All issues, including the settlement issue, need to be solved at the negotiating table with the Palestinians. These boycotts will only strengthen the Palestinian hand and make them less likely to agree to peace. The peace talks, in my opinion, are useless unless the Palestinians agree at the outset and say publicly and believe it that Israel has a right to exist as a nation. The second issue on this hearing is the Palestinian Authority giving bags of money to convicted terrorists in Israeli prisons. Right now, there are over 4,500 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, most of them serving time for terrorism-related crimes. Many of these terrorists receive a salary directly from the Palestinian Authority. Monthly salaries range from $500 to $3,500. The more serious the crime, the more dead Israelis or Americans, the more money the Palestinians in jail receive. In Palestine, being a terrorist is one of the best paying jobs. According to some estimates, the Palestinian Authority spends $4 to $7 million per month on this program, which is about 6% of the budget. One terrorist, Hosni Najjar, explained to Israeli police after his capture that he planned a terror attack in order to be captured so he could receive money from the Palestinian Authority. Now, isn't that lovely? Here's the real problem. The United States gave $440 million in fiscal year 2013 to the Palestinian Authority. We all know that money is fungible. The more money we give to help them with these job programs, the more money the Palestinian Authority has to pay terrorists. U.S. taxpayer money should not be paying and rewarding Palestinian terrorists for doing harm and killing Israelis and Americans. I'm also finally concerned about the lack of justice for American victims in terrorist attacks that occur in Israel. At least 54 Americans have been killed by Palestinian terror attacks since 1993. Another 83 have been seriously wounded. Some perpetrators of these attacks have never been brought to justice. Some have served limited sentences, and then they were released. The FBI could be doing more to track down these killers and bring them to the United States to stand trial. I think the United States government owes that to the victims of these deadly attacks. Victims of these attacks are also seeking justice through U.S. courts. The defendants are the Palestinian Authority and numerous foreign banks who are accused of funneling money to Palestinian terrorists. In one case, which we will hear more about today, a Jordanian bank is accused of laundering $90 million to Hamas through over 200,000 separate transactions. That's a lot of money, and it buys a lot of terror. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and what they have to say today. And now move to our ranking member, Mr. Sherman from California, for his remarks.
First, as to the Iranian deal, it's clearly imperfect, but we should remember that from 1998 till 2010, 3 administrations failed to enforce the sanctions laws we did pass, and more importantly, used all their power to go over a decade without us passing any additional significant sanctions. When we woke up in October of last year, we were in an incredibly weak bargaining position, strengthened only a bit by the sanctions adopted in 2010. So it's hard to say that the deal reached in Geneva is the problem. The problem is that for over a decade we did nothing, and it's hard to win a football game. You can yell at the coach as to what play he calls in the fourth quarter. If you don't put a team on the field the first 3 quarters, you're not going to find a great play for the fourth quarter. Now, as to these hearings, the effort to boycott and delegitimize Israel is anti-Semitism, plain and simple. When the world's only Jewish state is held to standards no other state is held to, and then is subjected to punishments no other state is subjected to, the motivation becomes clear. Though one can, if the worst human rights abuse in the world is building an apartment building in the wrong place, zoning decisions made by my own city council may fit into that category. We in this room have heard such incredible human rights abuses that those who think that the only nation worthy of sanctions is one that builds apartment buildings in the wrong places is very, I think it's anti-Semitism, plain and simple. In addition, there are those who focus on a particular instance and say that a particular Israeli sergeant shouldn't have fired his gun, but should have waited longer for the potentially hostile person to approach even closer, even while yelling, "Stop." Well, none of us are in that position. Who knows how much we'd risk our lives in order to determine whether the person approaching and ignoring our demands to stop was a civilian or a terrorist. But the fault of any incident, and hundreds like that take place every year, is not the sergeant who does or does not risk his life to this or that degree. The fault are those politicians who seek unreasonable aims through violent means. War is not the fault of those who fight it. It's the fault of those who wage it. As to the particular efforts by some to halt economic activity on the West Bank by boycotting products grown or made there, this is more than absurd. You're going to strangle the companies that provide jobs to Palestinians, then put on films about how the Palestinians don't have jobs, and then demand that the U.S. taxpayer give a lot of money to the PA Authority so they can employ people without jobs, and then, as the chairman points out, have the PA Authority give that money to terrorists. I think the term is chutzpah. It is simply absurd for those who claim to be concerned about the Palestinians to oppose investment that creates Palestinian jobs. And the only bad thing about the location of SodaStream is that they're not located in my district. The only place I would rather see jobs, or one of the places I would rather see jobs, than anywhere in the Middle East. Finally, as to aid to terrorists, our efforts should begin at home. There are those who provided U.S. citizens who are part of the flotilla that provided aid to Hamas. Those folks were violating U.S. terrorist law. We did nothing. Then there's Viva Palestina, which is on tape. We'll show you the YouTube. Giving assets to Hamas and soliciting tax-deductible contributions from American taxpayers. Finally, after considerable prodding, the IRS has begun the effort, and it is not yet effective, to make sure that a particular organization doesn't advertise that you give money to them and they'll funnel the money to Viva Palestina, which will funnel the money to Hamas, and give you a tax deduction for it. We've got to stop terrorist financing. It starts here. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for his wise comments. Chair will recognize other members who want to be heard for 1 minute. Chair recognizes the other gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for a minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I recently have been in Israel. I mean, it seems to be someplace that all members of Congress have to go. And I did speak to both sides. I spoke to people in the Palestinian Authority as well as the Israeli government. And I have come to the conclusion that there's only one thing holding up peace right now, a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinian people, and that is that the Palestinian people will not forcefully and forthrightly announce that they do not have a right to return to the pre-1967 borders of Israel. And of course, Israel won't agree to that because we're talking about millions of people's right to inundate that country, which would mean that country wouldn't exist anymore as the country that it is. And just like we, for example, couldn't sign a treaty with Mexico saying that anybody who can trace their family roots back to the Southwest has a right to immigrate into the United States, and then we would have 50 million to 75 million new American citizens, all of whom were Mexican. Now, I would hope that all the other issues that we're talking about, that we put that in perspective. I think these other issues, the settlements, all these other things are solvable. But until the Palestinians step forward and make that agreement, Israel will exist. We agree that it will exist, and that we don't have a right to inundate it with millions of other people. There won't be peace, and there won't be agreements. And I would certainly like the opinion of our panelists today as to whether or not my perception of the real stumbling block is really what it's all about. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding a hearing so that we can enlighten ourselves and get some good information to see maybe we can bring peace if we understand exactly what the problem is. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair will also recognize another member from California, Mr. Vargas.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I appreciate it. And I thank you very much again, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this issue forward so we can discuss it today. I would associate myself with the comments that you made as well as our ranking member. And I would say this, that Israel is our closest and faithful ally, and we should act accordingly. One of the things that is disturbing is to see some of these European nations acting as I would say the same as a ranking member in a very anti-Semitic way. You see all the human rights abuses around the world, and it's interesting you only pick on Israel. Interestingly, too, I was in Israel recently, and virtually every Israeli that you talk to wants peace. And in fact, some of the things that the government has been willing to do, release murderers and terrorists, just to talk about peace, trying to get to settlement. And you go to the Palestinian areas, we did, and they only speak hate and how much they hate the Jews and how much they blame everybody else except for themselves for the situation they're in. So again, I thank you very much for bringing this forward, and I hope that we can act as a faithful ally, as Israel has to us in a very difficult part of the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an important hearing. We tend to think of the fight against terrorism as a burden that falls mainly on the shoulders of government or military, diplomatic, homeland security, and law enforcement agencies. Yet there is one area where private citizens can play a leading role, and that is in stopping the flow of funds to terror organizations. Beginning in the 1990s, Western countries, and especially the United States, passed laws making it possible for victims of terror to sue the regimes that sponsor terror, banks that transfer funds to terror groups, front organizations that pretend to serve charitable causes, and even the terrorists themselves. It is with this in mind that I'd like to show some appreciation for the work of the Peris law firm and also the Israel Law Center, who work together with Western intelligence agencies and volunteer lawyers around the world to file legal actions on behalf of the victims of terror. With that, really look forward to your testimony here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The Chair will recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member as well for calling this important hearing, the witnesses today for making themselves available. Look forward to very much your testimony and what you can do to educate this subcommittee on the threats that an extremely important friend and ally to the United States and the State of Israel is facing. And not just Israel, but really from my vantage point, as a pillar of democracy and stability in the Middle East, what the reach of those that wish to do those forces of democracy and stability harm. I, along with Mr. Vargas, had a chance to visit Israel a couple of months ago, and I was just recently in Asia with Mr. Sherman as well, as we explored some of the threats and the complexities of confronting some of these forces literally around the world. And so I want to thank the Chairman for calling this hearing and look forward to your testimony today.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair will now recognize Mr. Lowenthal, also from California, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. Sherman, I want to thank you for putting this hearing together in order for our committee to examine some of the strategic issues of interest to the United States and to the U.S.-Israel partnership and Israel's relation with the European Union and some of the critical issues around that. I just want to say, while I proudly consider myself pro-Israel, which I am, and certainly anti-terrorist, and I'm very glad for this hearing, I also believe as we listen and we understand that we take an unbiased and objective point of view, that if we're ever going to have peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that we also hear and try to understand as much as possible the Palestinian point of view. Then we may not always agree with it, but we have to hear it and understand it, and I think that's very important as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Without objection, all of the witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of the record. I ask that after I introduce each witness that they keep their presentation to no more than 5 minutes. Now I'll introduce each witness now and then give them time for their statements. Mr. Edwin Black is an award-winning New York Times best-selling author with more than 1 million copies in print. His work focuses on genocide and hate, corporate criminality, corruption, and historical investigation. Mr. Black has been interviewed on hundreds of network broadcasts from the Today Show, CNN, and NBC, as well as leading networks in Europe and in Latin America. Dr. David Pollock is the Kaufman Fellow at the Washington Institute, where he focuses on the political dynamics of the Middle East. He previously served as senior advisor for the broader Middle East at the State Department and in several other advisory positions there, including 4 years as regional expert on the Secretary of State's policy planning staff. Previously, he was also chief of Near East, South Asia, Africa research at the U.S. Information Agency. Mr. Stephen Peris is the senior attorney and founder of the Peris law firm. He has litigated matters before the Supreme Court, courts of appeal, district courts throughout the country. His litigation practices focuses primarily on cases involving the immunity of foreign sovereigns and has included several groundbreaking cases against foreign states for their complicity in acts of international terrorism. Notable recent decisions include a successful turnover action against a $1.9 billion Iranian central bank funds in which money had been laundered into the United States. I thank all three of you for being here. We'll start with Mr. Black.
I thank this committee for inviting me I'm Edwin Black, and before I testify before any parliament, I always say I come not as a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal. I'm here for my information. I did hear the remarks of Chairman Poe and Member Sherman, and I found them to be factually accurate and historically incisive. So I'm here to talk about the Palestinian terrorist salaries, which I broke in my book on November 1st of last year in Canon. My book is Financing the Flames, and it is an inescapable reality that American taxpayers are directly funding individual named terrorists for individual named terrorist acts, just as Chairman Poe said. Here's how it works. An individual in the Palestinian Authority can go from being a nobody to a somebody, from rags to riches, just by committing an act of terrorism, perhaps blowing up a bus or invading a home and slicing the throats of children. At that point, he will go on an immediate official Palestinian Authority salary. The more people you kill, the higher is your salary. It can range, as you said, from a few $100s a month for maybe a 5-year sentence, and it actually can go up to $10,000 a month for a 25-year sentence. The actual law itself, which governs this, is published in my book on page 184, and this is the actual law, and you can see the sliding scale. This money also includes a rank in the government. You become a manager, a director, a supervisor. You can even become an assistant deputy minister, and so you have a civil rank as well. This money constitutes about $5 to $7 million a month of PA resources. It is prioritized, which means if they only have $1 million in the bank, and there's no food or they're lacking medicines and they need to pay these salaries, they pay the salaries first. The money goes directly to the prisoner by means of a POA, that's a power of attorney, and he can then turn it over to his girlfriend, to his mother, to his family, to his soccer club, to Al-Fatah, whatever it is. It does amount to approximately 6% of the PA budget. If there is any lack of alacrity in prioritizing these funds, there's an NGO called the Prisoners Club that makes public agitation to make sure that these monies are paid. If you add in the additional emoluments, wedding benefits, scholarships, soccer teams, special celebrations, it comes to 16% of the Palestinian Authority budget. All of this money comes from donor countries such as the United States, and in the United States, it is strictly against the law. The individual that Chairman Poe identified, Hosni Najaf, who deliberately initiated a terrorist plot, was seeking money for wedding expenses. So while Americans are choosing between food and fuel, Palestinians have an understanding that there is a bottomless pit of salaries for terrorists. Now, there is never going to be peace in the Middle East between the parties because the chief export is confrontation, terrorism. This is a business. It's kind of like asking the Saudis to stop drilling for oil. This is what they do. And the idea that this is not known is incorrect. It's true that I broke this in my book here, but everybody in Israel knows about this. Everybody in the Palestinian Authority knows about this. The entire Western media knows about this. The State Department has always known about this. The Foreign Office, the foreign ministries overseas have always known about this. The only one who has not been informed about this are the members in this institution and the constituents who vote the money. Now, I've only got 6 seconds left, so I won't go on. But if you also wish to ask me any questions about this, the international law, SodaStream, or any of the or who is financing among our taxpayers BDS? I'll be happy to answer those questions too. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Black. You got a lot in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Dr. Pollock.
Radio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, honorable members, for inviting me to testify to you today. It's an honor for me to be here, and I think important to discuss the timely and important topic of European attempts to boycott Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke just yesterday at AIPAC at length about the BDS movement, and I would like to begin with some facts and figures. The boycott threat against Israel right now is much more potential than real. Israel's economy continues to thrive, estimated to be growing in the range of 3% annually, in large part because of its continuing ability to export and to attract foreign investment. This includes trade and investment to and from the European Union, which remains Israel's single largest trading partner, with the U.S. close behind. Just to put this Israeli economy in global and U.S. perspective, it's worth noting that despite its relatively small size, the health of Israel's economy is also in our own economic interest. The high-tech partnerships between Israel and the United States are well known, but it may surprise you to hear that over the last decade, Israel has been a larger market for U.S. exports than oil-rich Saudi Arabia, or that at times during this past decade, Israel was one of the top 20 foreign direct investors in the American economy, or that Israeli companies, products, and licensed technologies are directly responsible for tens of thousands of decent jobs for American workers right here at home. As for current European policies, it is important to note that no European government supports any type of boycott against Israel today. When it comes to Israeli settlements or economic or other institutions beyond Israel's 1967 de facto borders, however, official European practice diverges. For example, the Horizon 2020 agreement between the EU and Israel, signed late last year, predicates that the EU will not fund research or related activities in Israeli settlements. And at the level of EU governments, the EU has advised its members that they may require, and several of the major European countries do require, special labels for Israeli products manufactured in the settlements across the 1967 de facto borders. At the level of the private sector or quasi-government economic entities, some European institutions have announced divestment or selective boycotts of Israel. And some of those were mentioned by some of you in your remarks just a few minutes ago. But on closer examination, most of these moves turn out to be either restatements of previous positions or very minor in economic impact. Moreover, these steps have been offset by other, more positive new decisions by European governments and by European companies. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of testifying about this issue in Europe to the Senate Foreign Relations and National Defense Committee of the French Parliament. And I would like very briefly to mention a few points that came up in that discussion. First of all, I noted that the Palestinian president himself, Mahmoud Abbas, when asked recently about boycotts against Israel, said publicly in Arabic that the PA opposes boycotts against Israel. Unfortunately, however, as is the case with many issues, other official Palestinian spokesmen have refuted that very statement. For example, Hanan Ashrawi, recently in an op-ed in an Israeli newspaper, wrote that boycotts against Israel are, as she put it, quote, the Palestinian nonviolent resistance, unquote. But when I told the French Senate that President Abbas of Palestine opposes boycotts against Israel. And I asked them, why then do you, in Europe, in some cases, support boycotts against Israel? They had no good answer. I believe that this is the kind of approach that the United States can also take, raising this issue very publicly, as you are doing today, considering whether there might be legislative or other legal remedies against boycotts against Israel, as we do, for example, in refusing to allow American companies to enforce the Arab boycott against Israel. These are measures that could very well be considered and that could nip this problem in the bud. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you, and I look forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Pollock. Mr. Peris. Perlis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sherman. You know, before I begin my comments this morning, I will say that I do think senior members of the bar have an obligation to help launch the careers of a younger generation of lawyers. It's why I teach, and in that spirit, I'd like to introduce Ms. Christine Stitcher to the committee. Ms. Stitcher is my clerk, and she is a law student at the George Mason University in Northern Virginia. Thank you. We have been studying the material support of terrorist attacks around the globe, particularly Palestinian terrorist attacks that result in the death or personal injury of United States nationals since 1995. And I would break that material support into two tiers, because it has been our observation over the last almost 20 years that there really are two tiers of Palestinian terrorists. You have an upper level terrorists like Hassan Salameh, whose activities killed Matthew Eisenfeld and Sarah Duker. Matthew was from Connecticut, Sarah was from New Jersey. Now, Hassan Salameh was recruited by Iran in Gaza. He was smuggled through Egypt into the Sudan, flown on an Iranian military aircraft to Iran. He was trained in Iran, and then he was returned through the Sudan and Egypt back into Gaza. One of the more perplexing things about that attack is when we looked at the forensic of the bomb, the energetic was a plastic explosive that had been made in the United States for which there is only one customer, and that's the United States Department of Defense. And candidly, I could not figure out how a plastic explosive made for the Defense Department wound up in a Hamas terrorist gym bag. As it turned out, Hassan Salameh was trained, and we learned a great deal about his training curriculum in Iran. He was trained by the Iranians not only to recruit suicide bombers, but to recruit suicide landmine diffusers, and he was taught how to defuse U.S.-manufactured landmines. In fact, we determined that the landmine, that what had happened was when Hassan Salameh was coming back through Egypt, he recruited suicide landmine diffusers, went into minefields that the Egyptian government had set up under the provisions of the Camp David peace accords. And of course, minefields are not guarded. They're simply posted. And they went in until they were able to salvage an American-made mine that was designed to destroy a Soviet T-54 tank. And I believe that energetic killed 2 U.S. nationals and 25 or 27 Israelis inside a bus. The terrorist, and that is the suicide bomber, essentially was vaporized by the energetic inside of the bus. The lower level terrorists are people like the suicide bomber on the bus. Those are the kinds of people that are getting martyr support. Now, we have what I consider to be probably the most important case in the country right now on martyr payments, and that's what's referred to as Lytle versus the Arab Bank, or the Arab Bank series of cases. Abigail Lytle was the daughter of a professional administrator in the Baptist church. He was posted in Haifa. He took his family with him to Israel. She did what all 13, 14-year-old girls do. She made friends with all the 13, 14-year-old girls in her neighborhood. They all got on a bus together one morning to go to school. They all died together on that bus. That terrorist receives martyr payments that were illegal. This currency is not Iranian. This currency is Saudi, and it was funneled through the Arab Bank's branch in Brooklyn, New York, which is why we brought the action in New York. The Eisenfeld and Duker action is brought under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act against Iran. That was successfully prosecuted. This action is brought under the Anti-Terror Act because the Arab Bank of Jordan is a private actor. The remedy against private actors is under the ATA rather than the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. I'm running out of time, but I will say, and I would emphasize that to the best of our knowledge, this is private Saudi money. There is no Saudi government involvement in that activity. In my written statement, which has been filed for the record, we do describe the fact that we are at something of a critical juncture in that case now. We're getting a great deal of pushback from the Department of State. That case is scheduled to go to trial in August. We hope to keep it on schedule, and we hope the committee will assist us in doing that. Thank you.
I want to thank all three of you for your superb testimony. I'll now recognize myself for some questions. Mr. Black, I want you to be a little more specific. I know it's hard for you to do because you were very blunt and candid and specific. Is U.S. money going to pay prisoners in Israeli jails that we would consider terrorists?
The answer is yes. It's illegal. Our government at the highest level knows it's illegal. Every hour of every day that this money continues to go to the PA, you risk the chance that another bus of more Americans will be blown up, and they will receive an official salary from the PA. The PA is continually in debt, and it relies upon donor countries for this money. Now, when you ask the PA, are you going to stop using our money to pay these terrorist salaries, they have a term for this, and the term is called donor filth. It's all over the media. It's all over the newspaper. It is all over the newspapers. It's in public remarks. And approximately 40% of the entire PA budget comes from donor countries, and much of the rest comes from remittances. There is no question that this country is supporting terrorism, not because somebody is publishing a website, but because somebody committed a specific act of terrorism and was paid on a sliding scale for the number of people that he killed. You're doing this now.
I'm going to ask some more questions. Try to be a little shorter, if you can. Briefer, I guess, is the answer. Okay. A little more specific. You know, I was a former judge, and people went to prison because they should have gone. But the idea that we pay people to go to prison, and the more serious the crime against society, they get more money, that is ludicrous. It'd be ludicrous in this country, but now we're paying people overseas. The prisoners that are in these Palestinian jails, have they committed crimes against American citizens that are directly or indirectly receiving money from American taxpayers?
Short answer, absolutely yes.
How many people are in Israeli jails?
Under this law, which only covers terrorists and does not cover shoplifters or burglars or any other types of prisoners that are not national security offenses. It's about 4,000. You said about 4,500. That would cover everybody. It's about 4,000. And none of them think they're going to serve the sentence that they're given, 5, 10, 20 years, because they all believe they're going to get out in the next prisoner swap or the next prisoner swap to discuss the next prisoner swap.
All right, there was a prisoner swap in October where 1,000 or so got out of Israeli jails. How many of those were terrorists?
They were all terrorists.
Okay, thank you. Are any of those people that are in Israeli jails? You know, terrorist means different things to different folks, but are they members of foreign terrorist organizations like Hamas?
Many are not. Many are individual Palestinians who have been impoverished by their own lack of enterprise in the Palestinian Authority and who see American and EU tax money as a way to become wealthy in their own land. And they're just individualized and incentivized by taxpayer money.
Dr. Pollock, Mr. Black testified earlier that some of these prisoners are getting up to $10,000 a month. So what is, these, as we now understand, these are killers who've killed somebody. The worse, more serious the crime, the more you get from the Palestinian Authority. So what is a Palestinian that's not a criminal making out there a month in somewhere in Israel? Just the average salary, monthly salary. Are they getting $10,000 a month?
No, sir.
What are they making? Do you know?
The per capita income in the West Bank which is under Palestinian Authority rule, is estimated right now to be approximately $4,000
a month.
No,
a year.
A year. Yeah.
So you get $4,000 a year
per capita.
Per capita.
Right. Right. So clearly, this
crime pays pays very well. The more serious you commit the crime against Israelis, Americans, Western Europeans, whoever, the more they're paid. Yes, and they can give this, understand, Mr. Black, the prisoner controls where the money goes. They can give it back to a terrorist organization. They give it to their mother-in-law, their girlfriend.
That's right. It's a POA, and the POA changes anytime they want it to change. And when I was in the British Parliament a couple of weeks ago, one of the parliamentarians said this is welfare to the families. It's not welfare to the families. It can go to anyone the guy designates, including his own terror cell.
Two quick questions. Explain what the Prisoners Club is, and explain what happens when these terrorists that are getting money to go to prison to kill people get out. What happens when they get out? Quickly, briefly.
When they get out, they get a pension. And the pension, this is money for life. So while we don't have any money here to pay our own pensions, they're getting the pension. And the Prisoners Club...
Because they went to prison as a terrorist act, they're getting a pension.
That's
because they're part of the government now.
And the Prisoners Club advocates to make sure they get more money, more benefits, more bonuses, more prioritization, and job training.
Thank you. I'll yield to the ranking member from California, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. Dr. Pollock, thank you for your focus on the economic vibrancy in Israel. And the judge and I have a bill to make Israel a visa waiver country. If that bill succeeds, we'll see a lot more investment in the United States because business people can't wait 3 or 4 weeks to go make a business decision. I've never seen a deal that was worth doing that would wait 3 weeks. And it would also be the answer to those who try to make Israelis feel like pariahs. We ought to put out the welcome mat in the most important country in the world. You've described enterprises on the West Bank. Do these provide jobs for Palestinians?
Yes, sir, they do. Most of Israel's economic activity on the West Bank, including settlement construction, provides jobs for Palestinians. It's actually mostly Palestinian workers who are physically building the new housing that the Israelis are constructing in some of these settlements and being paid decent salaries for that work.
And the most recent controversy has involved Oxfam, an organization funded in part by the work of this committee, and criticizing one of its board members for being a spokesperson for SodaStream. Doesn't SodaStream, great soda I might add, and we ought to have it here in the cloakroom, aren't most of the employees Arab Palestinians?
Yes, sir. Most of them are. It's a mix of employees. You have Palestinians and Israelis working together in the SodaStream manufacturing facility in the West Bank. I might just add parenthetically that Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his speech to AIPAC yesterday, specifically referred to this issue and had what I guess you would call colloquially a shout-out to Scarlett Johansson, and ended his speech by saying, frankly, my dear Scarlett, I do give a damn. So,
excellent. Mr. Black, among those getting these payments from the PA for their terrorism, are there those who have killed or injured American citizens?
Yes, there are scores of American citizens who have been killed or injured, and many of the Palestinians who are receiving these American-funded salaries are perpetrators of those acts.
I want to comment on some of the comments made by my fellow Californians. I was with President Clinton when we saw the PA charter changed, and supposedly that was the recognition of the Palestinians that Israel had a right to exist. They then retreated through an artifice to, well, Israel has a right to exist, but only as a second Palestinian state, by declaring that any Arab person who claims that any member of their extended family ever lived in Israel, and just this is a claim because there are no records from the Ottoman Empire. It's not like you carry around a little ID from 1898. So any Arabic-speaking person who makes that claim has the right to go and live in Israel with their entire extended family. So we saw that position. Now, my colleague from Southern California also points out we've got to listen to the Palestinians and their leaders. He's absolutely right. I've done a lot of that over the last 18 years. Privately, they know that Israel, that peace is with Israel as a homeland for the Jewish people, that the right of return, unless it's symbolic and meaning and of no practical importance, has to be swept away if there's peace. The problem is they enjoy the political advantages of fanning the flames loudly and then quietly tell members of Congress they know they've got to go in the other direction. The problem is that they've boxed themselves in. I'm going to astound my colleagues and yield back with 24 seconds to go.
I thank the ranking member. Before I yield to the other gentleman, one gentleman from California, I want to put in the record that while the EU boycotts Israel, Iran is shipping arms to terrorists in Gaza. Earlier today, the Israeli Navy raided a ship in the Red Sea and seized dozens of advanced rockets from Iran for the Palestinian terrorists in Gaza. These rockets had a range that could hit anywhere in Israel, so we can't forget about the Iranians in all of this. I'll yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats, Mr. Robacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I guess what I'm getting out of this is that the old expression, follow the money, is very applicable here. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the panelists today for shining some light on where the money's coming from. And surprise, surprise, it's coming from us. I mean, holy cow. One would think you follow the money and you're going to end up in, some Damascus or Tehran, and instead it's right here in Washington, D.C., and right here in some of the money that we're allocating. That needs to be corrected, and thank you for pointing that out to us. Over the years, I've been to many hearings like this where we discuss terrorism and we discuss attacks. And terrorism, terrorism is an attack on a civilian, and the Palestinians, in this case, have targeted civilians in order to terrorize a population to achieve an objective. And It seems to me that we have been listening to the Palestinians, and before, 20 years ago when I first came here, it seemed to me that Israel wasn't listening. It seemed to me that Israel did not have a plan of how to deal with the Palestinians, and they weren't willing to. They thought they should just disappear, become part of some other country. Well, since that time, I think Israel's made tremendous concessions to the Palestinians. They have given them territory and land and a sample government that they could have once a full agreement is reached. And they have also recognized that the Palestinians will have a right to a country as well. And it seems to me that we've seen lots of concessions from the Israelis, but as time has gone on, I haven't seen the concessions from the Palestinians. And as I say, I think all the Israelis that I've talked to and all the Palestinians I've talked to have led me to conclude that the only thing the Israelis really are looking for is an actual guarantee that the Palestinians believe they have a right to exist as a country. One of these things that separate, as I say, is the right of return that the Palestinians keep claiming, which is really a right to eliminate Israel as a country because it would inundate what is Israel with a foreign population. Is there a possibility that we could change this to a right of compensation? Because the Palestinian argument is that in 1948, so much land was confiscated from Palestinians, and these people have not been compensated for that land, thus they own it, and thus they should have a right to return. I'll get to my point, and that is, should we, number one, accept right of compensation as something that perhaps could be an alternative to the right of return? And number two, where would you get that money? And just I want to throw this out to the panel as well. When people talk about compensating people for that property that they lost, the Palestinians lost, at the same time in the 1940s, Jews left lots of land behind and lots of property behind in countries, Middle East countries, whether it was Egypt or whether it was Syria or whether it was Iraq or whether it was Iran. There were many Jews that were forced out of their homes and property, and I don't believe they were ever compensated either. Perhaps we could tell the governments that now have that valuable property that the Jews left in 1948, that property should be used as a means of compensating the Palestinians for the property that they lost. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I wrote a book about that called The Farhud, about that very point. Approximately 790,000 Jews were expelled from Arab countries shortly after the State of Israel began. They were made stateless. All of their property had been seized. They had dwelled in peace in the Middle East for 1,000 years before Muhammad. They were sent to expulsion camps. The earrings were pulled from their lobes. The bracelets were yanked from their wrists. And they were forced into Israel by these Arab countries to create a demographic time bomb. There was a small airline that was invented.
To get right to the point is, that was a lot of valuable property.
That was millions.
And so that valuable property, just a thought, Mr. Chairman,
and it was registered, by the way.
That might be able to be used as a source of money by those countries to compensate the Palestinians for the property they lost when Israel became a country. Just a thought. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. I do want to correct something for the record. I called you the ranking member of your subcommittee, much to the delight of my friends to the left. But you're the chairman, and you will stay the chairman, I suspect, a long time. But anyway, I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I do call you Your Honor because I know you were a judge, too.
And you need to call me that.
Yes, sir, and I always do. First of all, I have to say it almost seems impossible to believe that our government is indirectly funding terrorists in prisons in Israel. And, I mean, we certainly have the witnesses here testifying. I think we need to bring a representative from the government forward, Mr. Chairman, at some point to either refute it or to say that it's the case, because this is outrageous if it is the case. Again, I had not heard about it previously. It hasn't been reported on any of the news stations that I watch, but it is outrageous, and not a penny should go, of course, to any terrorist, and we need to get to the bottom of this. That's why I thank you for bringing this forward. I do want to ask some questions. The question was asked of us, if we could ask you by yourselves, about BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions, where the money's coming from. So I would ask you, where is this money coming from? It seems, unfortunately, that they're picking up some steam throughout the world, and it's very unfortunate because I don't see it anything less than just anti-Semitism, a little bit shielded, but not much. Could you tell us where the money's coming from for this movement? Dr. Pollock, you look like you're able to answer that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. You mean money to fund the BDS movement?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think not enough, at least to my knowledge, not enough solid research has been done on exactly that question so far. So I'm going to give you my judgment and impression. And that is that the money comes from a variety of sources all over the world, and there are some governments, including, for example, the South African government that is...
not our government, though. Please tell me this is not our government,
not
please.
to my knowledge.
Okay, good.
That are active in funding chapters that are of different organizations that are engaged in promoting boycotts against Israel. There are some academic institutions and societies, student organizations, for example, on various universities, including some here in the United States, that are very active in promoting this. I think their funding comes from a variety of individual donations and foundations. I'm not personally aware of any government money that supports it.
Mr. Black, I saw that you were anxious to answer the question. Do you know, sir?
Yeah. The number one source of BDS funding is taxpayers. Here's how it works. 501c3 organizations, you all remember the investigation I did on the Ford Foundation in which they were funding all of these anti-Semitic groups. 501c3 groups raise money and donate it to organizations involved in the BDS. For each $1 million of tax-exempt money, American taxpayers have to pony up $440,000. The number one organization which has been associated with this process has been the New Israel Fund, which gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Coalition of Women for Peace so that they could create a global infrastructure of boycott, including a database called Who Profits. They stopped giving this money in 2011, but now they continue to give hundreds of thousands of dollars to organizations like Breaking the Silence, Adala, and B'Tselem, which are absolutely essential to keep the BDS alive. New Israel Fund.
Thank you. Mr. Perlis, do you have an answer to that, too?
I do not, sir.
Okay. I think that's something that we need to act on also then. I see this movement, of course, it's become somewhat worldwide now, and it seems to have a lot of money. It seems that someone's orchestrating, and again, it's nothing less than veiled anti-Semitism. I guess my last question would be, how do we then, how do we move forward then to make sure that these groups don't get the money, that our government's not involved in it or implicated? What would you do, Dr. Pollock? What would your solution be?
Thank you again for the question. I think there could be, as my fellow witness just noted, there could be an opportunity to investigate the tax-exempt status of organizations that might be knowingly or unknowingly funding activities that are either illegal or improper or not eligible for tax-exempt status because they're political advocacy. That's one possibility. But I do think that the most significant way of addressing this issue is by raising public awareness about it. And I don't think that this is a lost cause, even in Europe, if I may say so, with all due respect to any Europeans who might be here. I do think that there are organizations in Europe who are certainly advocating BDS, but there are also organizations, very good ones, in Europe that are actively opposing it and fighting against it, and they deserve.
My time has expired, so I'm going to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Chair will recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. So this policy, this official policy, how long has this been enforced? Mr. Black, anybody?
Are you talking about the law of the prisoner?
Yes.
The law of the prisoner goes back years. It was an unofficial policy before it was regularized into Palestinian law. The actual law itself was, and its qualifications, was read to me over the phone by the minister of the Ministry of Prisoners. They have an entire ministry devoted to this, so it's years. And may I also say that while
10 years or more?
Oh, at least 10.
Okay, so it's nothing new. And to be clear, just to make sure I understand this, there's no direct State Department money that we can tell going to this program, or is
I didn't say that.
Okay,
I believe the money is going directly. Of course it is. It's fungible. You can't give money to an Al-Qaeda soup kitchen and then say, but this soup kitchen money is not going to go to feed the troops.
So if I can just give you a scenario and you can validate it for me. So State Department funds some USAID project in the area, and then that money is misappropriated, and at least or portions of, and then put towards this project.
The money goes into the PA. The PA doesn't have its own currency. We're now investigating the routes and the foreign accounts that the PA uses, and then the PA divvies up the money, and they borrow from various accounts, including the Army account, the military account, the police account, and
okay, so does the State Department just wholesale give an appropriation to the PA?
In some cases, yes.
What's the level of funding? Do you know? Do you have any idea what kind of money?
Well, I know what it is in England, and here a number of $440 million. I'm not sure if it's block grants or if it's targeted money, but all of this money goes into one pot, fungible. It comes from the Latin word that means mushroom.
Is there no accounting on State Department's side for exactly how each dime is spent?
They don't want to account for it.
Okay, so who would be? Is there a person at State? Is there an agency? Is there a person at State that we can turn to, bring in here, and have a discussion with that would be responsible for the accounting?
He's currently in Europe.
Who is that person?
Secretary Kerry.
Thank you. So there's been a law in the books, in my understanding, since 1990. Regarding victims of terrorism, that's been where the United States could extradite these individuals that had perpetrated the alleged crime. To your knowledge, how many folks since that time? I think there have been, according to what I'm reading, 54 U.S. citizens killed in Palestinian terror attacks. How many of those perpetrators that are alive? Not obviously the ones that have blown themselves up, you can't do much with them, but the ones that have lived through their attacks have been extradited back to the United States for prosecution.
That's a juridical question. I'm going to pass it to this gentleman here.
Mr. Perry, first let me thank you for the compliment in your opening remarks. It's very much appreciated. I think you need to divide the world of Palestinian terrorist attacks into two different categories. If you are talking about Palestinian terrorist attacks that occur outside of Israel, such as aircraft hijackings. For example, we represented 3 U.S. nationals who were shot in the head, execution style, and tossed out of an aircraft in Malta. The surviving Palestinian terrorist in that attack served 6 years in Malta and then was freed without notice to the United States. The U.S., the FBI chased that man to the end of the earth, dragged him back out of Africa. He was prosecuted here in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and is currently serving a life sentence. We do a very good job. The Justice Department, we as a nation, the Justice Department does a very good job for attacks that occur outside of Israel. With respect to attacks that occur inside of Israel, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever.
Why is that?
I think that is a.
What is your opinion?
My opinion?
Yes. This is what you do. This is what you study. This is your expertise.
This is what I do. We've had a lot of discussions with the Department of Justice over the years. One of my clients, Steve Flato, who lost a daughter, Elisa, in a terrorist attack, remains quite active in this area. I think it's the view of the Department of State that were the United States to prosecute Palestinian terrorists for acts of terror committed in Israel, that it would somehow interfere with the ability of the Department of State to stand as a neutral or the honest.
So my time has expired. I appreciate your answer, Mr. Chairman. Just let me. Does that policy cut across the political grain in the United States, both Republican and Democrat administrations, or is there a difference? With your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
No, there's no difference.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your input.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Lowenthal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to follow up on the same line of questioning that first I think Congressman Vargas raised and then Congressman Perry about. It's so shocking for us to hear about how U.S. funds are directly or indirectly supporting salaries for convicted terrorists. I think our assumption has always been that much of those funds really are that we promote through USAID are towards local economic growth for the well-being and creation of stability, which will lead economic stability, which will lead towards political stability. So the question I'm raising is, if these funds, as Mr. Black are commingled, they're then whatever funds go into this big pot, and then out of that pot, what are you suggesting that we do right now?
Okay. Peace is possible in the Middle East. Some 30 to 35,000 Palestinians a day make an hour to 2 hour ride to work in equality in Israeli jobs. But peace doesn't have a chance when you're paying people to commit murder. What I would do if I were you, and I'm not, I have no standing here.
Absolutely, but we're just asking what you would do.
I would immediately, by sunset, stop all money to the PA until this one program, this one law is rescinded, then claw back all of these monies that have been paid over the years to kill innocent civilians, and then resume the process along the lines that Kerry and others have suggested, which is pay for peaceful coexistence and do not pay for murder. This House must stop paying for murderers. Stop it today.
Thank you. Dr. Pollock, do you have any response to that? Where do we go from here?
I do agree that this PA policy is abhorrent and that the United States should play no part, if we are, in supporting it. At the same time, I think that the peace process, as it's currently underway, as I understand it from press reports, because many of the details have not been released officially, as I understand it, the peace process that's currently underway is indeed addressing many of these issues about coexistence, about settlements, about refugees, both Jewish and Arab, about compensation for past losses, about all of the other issues that are standing in the way of peace. And so I think it's important, whatever we do, in my own personal view, whatever we do about terrorist funding or other issues, to maintain a peace process and peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. That is also an important and essential part of the way forward, in my view. I would point out one other aspect of this, which is very closely related to it, and that's incitement to violence and to terrorism on the part of the PA officially, the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. I'm not speaking here of Hamas, which we know incites to terrorism and violence against Israelis and Jews. But the PA itself, under Mahmoud Abbas, and sometimes, I'm sorry to say, Mahmoud Abbas himself, are also guilty of incitement to violence and terrorism by glorifying terrorists, not just paying salaries for them, but by calling them heroes and role models for future generations. This is something that I personally have spent the last couple of years analyzing and documenting and speaking to both Israelis and Palestinians about in great detail. And I published on the Washington Institute website, if you'll permit me, just a sort of an unpaid commercial here, a very long report about this called Beyond Words, Causes, Consequences, and Cures for Palestinian Authority Hate Speech, where I document and analyze the reasons for and also the remedies for this kind of rhetorical, official glorification of terrorism on the part of the Palestinian Authority. This, too, is an issue that I think needs to be addressed in the context of the current peace talks, just as seriously as we talk about Jerusalem or refugees or Israeli security or any other issue. The issue of incitement and hate speech needs to be part of these diplomatic...
Thank you. Mr. Peris, do you have anything to add?
I would. You know, I must say, I apologize, I'm not as colorful as my colleagues are here. You know, maybe I'm more of a technocrat, but speaking as the technocrat, what we found in the Arab bank case, and in order to meet our burdens of proof in this kind of litigation, we really need to track this money and tie particular payments to particular acts of violence. What we find is what I could best describe as an abuse of bank secrecy. That is Palestinian Authority bank secrecy laws, Jordanian bank secrecy laws, Lebanese bank secrecy laws. The problem really is very much akin to Credit Suisse using Swiss bank secrecy laws to hide, if I read the newspapers correctly recently, the economic accounts of some 22,000 Americans who were engaged in income tax evasion. In the Arab bank case, I believe a total of 5 federal judges, 2 district court judges, 3 federal appellate judges, have now approved discovery sanctions against the Arab bank for its failure to turn over discovery. The bank is relying inappropriately in the U.S. court system on Palestinian, Jordanian, and Lebanese bank secrecy laws. That, by the way, is the nub of our current dispute with the Department of State.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Gentlemen, I appreciate you being here. And I find it unacceptable that since mid-1990s we've given $5 billion to the Palestinian Authority in aid is what I've come up with, and there's no accountability. And I see it over and over again that we give foreign aid to these countries, and like you said, it's under a mushroom, and we know what that means, a growing environment of a mushroom, and that's what I feel like a lot of time. You said that you would cut it off by tonight. What would be the ramifications if we were to do that, Mr. Black?
You're being extorted right now, and you're giving into it. Basically, the idea is if we stand up to terrorism, they're not going to sign a peace deal. They're never going to sign a peace deal as long as they're being paid for terrorism.
Right.
Stop this funding today, and if it's that important to them, as they say it is, that they'd rather starve than stop this program, then they have spoken for themselves. I believe that people in this neck of the woods want peace, Arab and Jew, but you must give peace a chance, and you can't keep rewarding this bad behavior. If this program is stopped forcibly by U.S. cessation of funding, there'll be a lot of noise, and that will just typify what the Arab Street is like, but it will take leadership. We just can't put people on salary for killing Americans, Israelis, and Europeans
I agree.
in the most uncivilized fashion. Stop it tonight, if possible.
Dr. Pollock, you were talking about the boycott. If the PA and the Israeli agreement does not work in the peace process, do you see the boycott getting worse and increasing, or do you think it's going to be a non-issue?
I think in Europe it will increase. And I would like to quote for the record a statement by the EU ambassador to Israel, who said recently, and this is a quote of what he said, not my opinion. He said, "If the talks are wrecked as a result of an Israeli settlement announcement, then the blame will be put squarely on Israel's doorstep. Israel will find itself increasingly isolated, not necessarily because of any decisions taken at a government level, but because of decisions taken by a myriad of private economic actors, be it companies, be it pension funds, be it consumers." This is the EU ambassador to Israel.
Are you saying that? Are you finding that? Is there an anti-Israeli sentiment about the acquisition of land over the years? Is that why they're doing this? And
yes.
They're just getting to a point where they're saying they're not going to tolerate this anymore? Is that the sentiment you're seeing?
That's correct.
I guess I want to ask all of you this. Do you feel the release of the PA prisoners in Israel was a wise move with Secretary Kerry going over there and demanding that? Mr. Peris, if you want to start.
I can answer in very succinct fashion. No.
Dr. Pollock.
I think that this was an Israeli government decision, not an American demand. And the Israeli government had a choice of whether or not to prefer a settlement freeze or a prisoner release. And they chose a prisoner release.
Mr. Black?
Well, you have to ask yourself, why was it so imperative that the killers be released? And that's because the PA places a high premium on those among its citizens that kill civilians.
Okay. And then, let's see. Would you say the U.S. government, particularly the State Department, is helpful in assisting the victims in these cases, Mr. Peris, in your experience?
You know, that's a it's a difficult question for me to ask or difficult question for me to answer in a public forum.
Do you want to submit your answer?
Now, let me say that it takes a lot to get the State Department motivated to help people. They are not culturally, as an institution, helpful. When they decide that they're going to help people, they are tremendously effective. So that what I have could best be described as a relationship in constant tension with the State Department. Most of the time, we are in an adversarial posture. In the Arab Bank case, for example, we are currently in an adversarial posture. When the Libya claims reconciliation process was going forward, the Department of State determined that the interest of victims and the department's interests were synonymous with one another, and the department was tremendously effective in assisting victims and creating a settlement with the Libyan government. In fact, at the request of the Department of State's legal advisor's office, I went with then legal advisor John Bellinger to a D.C. bar lunch honoring him and spoke his praises for the work his office had done in support of terror victims in that settlement. So the answer is we have a very complicated relationship that is always
I'm out of time, and I appreciate all three of you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting. This is a very interesting subject, and if we look at the wider Middle East and we look at what I would call negotiations in Iran, I think it's important, even though that's not the actual issue we're here to talk about it, it's important to stress that I don't see any way that with the interim agreement with Iran that we end up seeing an Iran without the capability to enrich uranium. And so you see what's happening in those negotiations, you see what's happening with the issues we talk about, and there's a lot to be very concerned with. And so I appreciate the three of you coming here. I'm probably not going to take all 5 minutes, and as you see, I had another hearing, and so I came a little late. So if these questions have been asked, I apologize. But Mr. Pollock, what can Israel do to diversify its trade beyond Europe so that this doesn't have quite the impact and Israel can be strong without these boycotts?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you. I think that the Israelis, both the private sector and the Israeli government, are already trying to move in that direction as a kind of a fail-safe, just in case. But the reality is that for the foreseeable future, it's my professional judgment that the EU and other European countries who may not be in the EU will remain very, very important trade and investment partners for the Israeli economy. And so the Israeli government is currently engaged in trying to estimate in a, I think, a straightforward, factual way what the consequences for the Israeli economy would be in the case of, in case this boycott and divestment and sanctions movement does gather strength in Europe. But I want to emphasize that this is a potential threat. At the moment, it is not a real threat to the Israeli economy. European countries and European companies continue to trade on an increasing scale with Israel and to invest on an increasing scale with Israel and to send tourists at increasing volumes to Israel. This is not true of every single European country. You do see a pattern in which some of the Scandinavian countries and Holland in particular and Ireland in particular are pulling back to some extent from those economic relationships with Israel. But that's more than offset by increasing economic relationships with the other larger European economies.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's in Europe's interest to have these great relationships, and if you're going to push any of your power anywhere, maybe it ought to be somewhere like Russia right now or something like that with what's going on.
Yes, I would agree with you, sir. If Europe is going to impose sanctions, it should be against Russia, not against Israel.
It might make sense.
Yeah.
If it's been said that the official Palestinian position is against boycotts, can you elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. Again, President Abbas was asked about this question on the occasion of the Nelson Mandela Memorial Service in South Africa not long ago, and he said quite publicly, and I want to emphasize this was in Arabic to an Arab audience, so it counts for more. He said that the PA officially opposes boycotts against Israel.
Okay.
He said, we, the Palestinians, are negotiating with Israel. Therefore, how can we ask other people to boycott Israel if we're not boycotting Israel? Now, subsequently, unfortunately, and this is a pattern in Palestinian official messaging, subsequently that statement was walked back and watered down, and I would say almost contradicted in statements by other senior Palestinian officials, not Abbas himself, but some of his more senior colleagues in the PA government, who said, for example, that we don't advocate boycotts against Israel, but we do advocate boycotts against settlements. Or that we don't advocate boycotts against Israel at a government level, but we do advocate private boycotts against Israel. Or who simply said, as Hanan Ashrawi did very publicly, she's a member of the PLO Executive Committee and an important spokeswoman for the PA government, who said that boycotts against Israel should be supported and that BDS should be supported because it is, again, as she put it, quote, the Palestinian nonviolent resistance against Israeli occupation. So what you have is a mixed message from the Palestinians.
Thank you. And Mr. Black, just quickly, when these folks receive this money that you're talking about, is there anything that restricts them from giving that money to further terror causes?
None at all. They have a POA, a power of attorney. It can change from time to time, and they designate who the recipient is. If the recipient is their girlfriend or their terrorist cell or their attorney or their mother, it can go to any destination that they choose.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I appreciate the witnesses for your excellent, insightful testimony. And Mr. Peris, especially on a personal note, thank you for the work you do for victims. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Do you have another question?
No, not a just a
comment.
I also want to commend Mr. Peris for his record, and as an old tax lawyer, a couple of things for the record. You talk here that you get a 44% federal tax subsidy for these charitable contributions. I think that's an insult to my former colleagues who are tax lawyers who wouldn't settle for less than 65% subsidy when you can make gifts of appreciated capital gain property, reduce state as well as federal income taxes. Also, as to tax administration, a big chunk of the PA's revenue is remitted to them by Israel, which collects for the PA their tariffs and value-added taxes. The decision as to whether money which is fungible should be turned over to an organization that does some good things and does some absolutely terrible things is one we'll wrestle with in the future. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Thank the gentleman once again for their testimony. This committee is adjourned.
Very nice. You see Patrick Lawson from time to time? Yeah, sure, all the time. Yes, say hello to him for me. I will. Great guy. Thank you.